PixMix is brought to you by the Arun Show, broadcasting on Liberated Syndication and on youtube.com/Arun Show, and is in association with the Old School Lane podcast.
PixMix is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with the Arun Meta Show.
Welcome to PixMix with Arun.
And Patricia.
Hey Patricia, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm feeling rather super today.
Yeah, I know. It could be for multiple reasons. At the time they're recording this, it's the weekend. Black Panther is going to be coming out in theaters. Yeah, there's, or maybe it could be in junction to today's episode of PixMix.
Okay, and just a bit of an announcement on regards to the schedule, because people are kind of like wondering when PixMix actually does come out. Well, originally we were supposed to be doing it every 10 days, but because of the scheduling issues and because of other things that have happened beyond our control, basically it's just going to come out when it comes out. So at the moment we've got one coming up here, and then in the next couple of days, probably like 2-3 days later, we're probably going to have to do another one. So just to keep up with the schedule.
Yeah, considering that, we're getting really, really close to The Incredibles 2. And for those who actually watch the Olympics, which as of the time of this recording is just started about a few days ago, they're about to showcase some new footage this coming Wednesday.
And it's going to be very exciting indeed. But for the meantime, let's stick with the stick with the Pixar films that are actually existing. And so this one is a rather super one, and so I think it's probably some people are teasing. I think some people are going to guess what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So might as well just get started.
It is The Incredibles, and may I say, this truly is an incredible film, Patricia.
Oh yeah, I absolutely love this film. It's definitely, at that point, the most unique Pixar movie out of the bunch, and an original concept too. I mean, who would have thought about a family of superheroes? You ever seen that meme during the time in which the new Fantastic Four movie was coming out? And everybody hated it just as much as like the quote unquote original. And then they were saying like, guess what? There was a good Fantastic Four movie. It was called The Incredibles.
Indeed. And it was, in a way, it caught a lot of people by surprise because, and on top of that, the actual teaser that they actually did for it, I mean, the way that they were framing the story, it looked like it was just going to be, because if you remember, they did the whole, like, the bit in Bob's office where they show you, like, all the, the paraphernalia from, like, and all the mementos from, like, his career, and then it shows, like, the big news flash saying that Mr. Incredible retires, and it looked like they were going to go on the story of, it's a superhero who's just basically is retired and then he's going to come back. And which, obviously in the story they went with in the original, but it looked like if you think about it, in the original teaser that they brought out, don't you think it was actually going to be quite a different and maybe even more predictable movie than what we actually got?
It could have been. For those who haven't seen the teaser yet, essentially, just like what Arun said, it showcases Mr. Incredible's office, about all the memorabilia with all the newspaper articles discussing about how great of a superhero Mr. Incredible was, announcing his retirement. And then he receives a phone call saying that they need Mr. Incredible's help, and so he suits up. And then it turns out that he is not in his prime, if you know what I'm saying. And so he's being called over to his wife, calling him to come down to dinner. And Mr. Incredible is struggling to get his belt on because he can't fit into it anymore. And yeah, I mean, when I first saw it, I thought it was, it's going to be like really comedic. It's going to be like The Tick or something.
Yeah, and I guess I would say like, how fun would it have been if the Mr. Incredible was The Tick? like and was like that. But mind you, what we got was I thought was brilliant. So I mean, it was.
Yeah. I'm sure that if it would have been that case, the Tick, even though that a lot of people from our generation grew up with it and loved it, I'm sure for the younger generation that would have been great as well. But I'm glad that it does have its own identity, especially during the case in which, like, roughly a few years later, we would have gotten the Fantastic Four movie. And I guess when looking back on it, it just makes us appreciate all how The Incredibles was. And I remember that for the longest time, there were a lot of TV shows and cartoons that tried to be like The Incredibles. There was a lot of cartoons about, oh, there was this family of secret agents, like Nickelodeon's The X's. Oh, there's a family of superheroes, or there's this family that goes on a bunch of adventures. There seemed to be a lot more of that when The Incredibles came out.
Yeah.
And it also didn't help much that it did come out during the hype of superhero movies with Spider-Man and X-Men and the likes.
Yeah, but what made The Incredibles unique, at least in my opinion, was the fact that they did go on the superhero family route. They did go the comedic route, and basically they gave us a side of superheroes that we probably would never have seen in, say, like Spider-Man or like some of the other superhero films that would have come out, because they did go like the stereotypical kind of like superhero movie kind of style with it, which I thought I kind of was a fear that I thought Pixar might do. I think it probably wouldn't stand out the way that it actually does, and to Pixar's credit, they realized and to Brad Bird's credit especially, they realized the situation that they were in, and they created something unique and something different from what the things were. And I'll definitely safely say this: we did actually, as you said before, we did get a good Fantastic Four movie, which is actually this movie. And I'll definitely tell you this movie takes a massive dump on Fantastic, without a shadow of a doubt. This film, is way and beyond some of the other team hero movies, I guess we could say. I guess we didn't really, after The Incredibles, can we really say that we had a good superhero team movie after that? If you think about it, because
let's see. I mean, it wouldn't be until like at least a decade, because almost a decade, or maybe over a decade, because the Avengers would have came out, and then we had Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So I guess if you want to count the Justice League TV series, which I'm sure that would have been like around the time, and Teen Titans as well, but they weren't a family. They were just separate superheroes, and they were based off of their own individual comic books. They all came together. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, etc. Teen Titans, the same thing, with Robin, and then he eventually joined up with the Titans as well. And let's see, and then of course the Avengers, Thor, Captain America, Iron Man. They were all separate. But The Incredibles, it was a group, it was a family that stuck together, just like the Fantastic Four. But in this case, it was like a kid version of it. It's like, oh, it's not going to be like incredibly violent or incredibly serious like the Fantastic Four, as much as you want to debate on how serious it gets. But yeah, it was basically that for a new generation of kids. For those who were maybe a little too young to see X-Men or Spider-Man, then they could watch The Incredibles. I mean, at that point in time, Pixar had already been fully established as a company with great quality movies, because 2004, this would have been the height of Pixar's and DreamWorks' popularity. Sure, DreamWorks was also becoming really popular with their 2D movies, but they wouldn't get the height until Shrek came along. And this was when Disney was pushed into the backside. Nobody cared about Disney as much anymore. Pixar and DreamWorks were in the height of their popularity. And so Incredibles is one of those movies that a lot of people have been wanting for a very long time for a sequel. And it would be until almost 15 years later until we got one. And there's a reason why a lot of people wanted to see an Incredible sequel, because similar to Toy Story, it had a lot of possibilities. There was a lot of characters, and the world was interesting to look at. It's a very interesting side into superheroes that we haven't really seen much before.
Yeah, it baffled me massively why they did not immediately pounce on an Incredible sequel. Like, cause like you look at. I mean, we'll obviously go into the box office. I mean, at the end of the show, but it just baffles me that no one sat there and thought, we've done really well with The Incredibles. Like, why? When they said that they did really well with Toy Story, immediately one of the ideas they wanted to go for definitely was Toy Story 2. I mean, obviously it was a couple of years after the fact, but I mean, at least it wasn't to the stretch that we're now having with The Incredibles jumping over to The Incredibles 2, where obviously you've got a massive gap of more than a decade. It's like so it's just
that is true.
Yeah,
but
I would really.
Must we forget that the next movie that came after The Incredibles was Cars?
Yep, and so I think we knew what the method of thinking of that was there. But anyway, we'll get to Cars, I'm sure, eventually. But just to switch gears just for a second, because before The Incredibles, before we get further into that, there actually was a short. And the short was known as Boundin', and it was their 2013 animated short that came before The Incredibles. And so, just to give a bit of a summary of the plot, in the West lives a lamb who takes pride and joy in his wool. A man comes and shears the lamb, and the lamb becomes depressed. And it's up to Jackalope to teach him to bounce from life's troubles. So I thought this was a very good musical. Beginning.
Yeah, I thought it was really good too. I'm not much of a Western fan, but I thought it was cute. I thought that it was a nice little lesson about even if you look different, deep down, you're still the same.
Mm-hmm. And, dare I say, I mean, obviously this is the only good Western, I think, style Pixar thing I think we've seen. I think, obviously, The Good Dinosaur was not... Yeah, we're never going to forget The Good Dinosaur, are we? It's like, it's the thing that's still...
I don't know why we're still talking about a fairly average, forgettable Pixar movie, and here we are. I don't know.
But not very forgettable, is it?
Yeah, you have... basically, you have a singing and you have narration by the guy who came up with the story and who created and animated. And you have this lamb who's constantly bouncing around, and everybody is like admiring his wool. And then one day the wool is sheared off, and he's really depressed. And then this jackalope comes along and says, "Hey, don't worry. Eventually your wool will grow back, but in the meantime, just be happy being yourself." And that's essentially what it is. And it's very nice. It's not one of my favorite Pixar shorts, but I did find it to be really, really enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a slight contrast to what we would see later on, because you have this happy, cheerful Western short, and then you have a movie about superheroes.
Yeah. Do you think that's what made the shorts stand out? Do you think, after we've been through quite a few shorts now, and after we've noticed that they are massively different to what basically precedes it? Like, I mean, imagine if Lifted came out before Wall-E. Like,
that would have been like really on the nose. Or if Sanjay's super team would have been paired up with the Incredibles.
Yeah, that would have probably it's glad that they had a situation where the shorts were massively and radically different from the themes of the big movies, because if you had Sanjay Super Team before you had the Incredibles, it would feel a bit like, well, okay, we've seen one superhero related thing and now we're going right on to this other superhero related thing. It's like, it's not. I mean, it kind of doesn't really put you in the right frame of mind, I think, to kind of move on to. It kind of introduces a something, and then it introduces something different, but in the same wavelength, if that makes sense. And it doesn't feel linear in a way. But whether it's like,
sure.
when you have a nice little story before you have something completely different, it's like it kind of gets you. You can't have to say, "Hey, I'm about to see a really good Pixar film," because look, we got this little really good short that's very original and is very well done, and now we're going to move on to something. Now we're going to move on to the final presentation. It's a nice way to start. So
right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now to the plot. The film is set in a 60-esque alternate universe where superheroes, known as publicly as supers, are renowned and commended for their heroic deeds worldwide, allowing them the luxuries in the Golden Age. One in particular superhero who truly lives to this age is the super strong Mr. Incredible, engaged to the dexterous Elastigirl and the best friend of who is a cryokinetic Frozone. So. It's interesting, Frozone, because, after, when Frozone was introduced, and then we got Elsa from Frozen. It's like, the first thing that
Yeah,
came to
and not to
yeah.
mention that Frozone is voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, and then eventually he would be, being in the Avengers and all the other Marvel movies.
Uh-huh. So yeah, it feels so weird how they all kind of like, come together in a way, and like it all comes full circle. So it's very, very strange in that way, but Mr. Incredible, a great introduction, I think. Where he's living the higher life. He's this very popular superhero. Everyone loves him, and then we're introduced to Elastigirl, who he's engaged with, and the great thing about the beginning is that you get to see the conflict between Bob Parr, his secret identity, and the you get to see Mr. Incredible. So it's like they're the same person, but they're two different interactions, if you will. So he's and you get to see the kind of two kind of conflict with each other, because you've got when it comes to the part where Mr. Incredible is going off to the wedding, to go marry Elastigirl. You notice that he doesn't really have time to kind of deal with stuff at that point, and so you get to see kind of like a conflict between the two worlds that Mr. Incredible and Bob Parr kind of like accumulate, if you will. So
Yeah, not to mention that when we first get introduced to all of these superheroes when they're being interviewed, it seems like there's a bit of an opposite reaction in which Mr. Incredible talks about that he, wants to settle down and have a family, and Elastigirl saying like, "What? Leave the superheroine to the men? No, we gotta rock. Girls need to rock out." So it's kind of hilarious and ironic about how the roles will be reversed as soon as they get married and they have kids and 15 years pass. But the reason why they're no longer superheroes is because of a lot of the damage, and people are suing the superheroes, saying that they don't want to be saved anymore and that they're causing a lot more trouble than it's worth. And so a lot of them have to go into hiding.
yeah, I liked Helen's introduction, if you will, like Elastigirl, because if you remember when she said, leave the superheroes to the men, I don't think so. But then she softly kind of says, I don't think so. And you kind of get to see at the very beginning, there's kind of like, a conflicting character in Helen, because there is part of her who feels adventurous and feels like there needs to be this kind of like front that she has to be Elastigirl. But then, kind of like behind the scenes, she is kind of like, a bit more homely, if you will. It's like she's more,
Right.
she's more kind of like settled down. And so that's and obviously obviously with the news that The Incredibles 2 is going to be based around Helen. I think is that's going to be, and it's playing. Hopefully they do play off against that character conflict, because that's going to be really cool if they do. So we get
Definitely.
we get to introduce to our what will be our villain, which is Buddy Pine, and who at the time considers himself Incrediboy. He's Mr. Incredible's sidekick, and so. Mr. Incredible wants something to do with
he's
him.
essentially he essentially doesn't have superpowers, and he wants to use technology so he can be able to help out Mr. Incredible. But Mr. Incredible sees that he's just some annoying fanboy who's in the way, and he's trying to capture this villain who's in this office building and trying to rob it. And along the way, Incrediboy or Buddy or whatever, basically the younger version of the main villain that we'll be talking about a little later. He tries out his new invention. It backfires. Both Mr. Incredible and Buddy kind of like fly off, and the villain gets away. And the police are asking like, where's the bad guy? Why didn't you catch him? And then Mr. Incredible gets embarrassed, and he tells Buddy to go home. And Buddy is very upset, and he feels very disappointed that not only did he not help Mr. Incredible catch the bad guy, but that essentially that the person that he idolizes so much is telling him to go away, that he wants nothing to do with him.
Isn't that brilliant, though? Because, how easy would it have been to basically just have, Buddy, who then later becomes Syndrome? How easy would it have been, basically, just to say, I'm Syndrome, I'm the bad guy, and I'm going to basically cause mayhem for, unexplained reasons, and Mr. Incredible's going to stop me? Like, it's like it would have been easier
Yeah,
just to
this
do
is
that.
yeah, this is basically a right version of Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man 2, in which he was incredibly obsessed with Spider-Man. He was a fanboy. And then something happened involving with Spider-Man, and then he turns into Electro, and now he wants revenge on him.
And because I mean, also on top of that, I mean, they could have gone the route of like, yeah, Buddy was a techno geek and he went too far and blew himself up with one of the experiments, and then all of a sudden he became the evil syndrome. I mean, they could have gone in that stereotypical direction as well. But yeah, this is great setup for a villain because Mr. Incredible has had a has basically touched this person, and in the and has created basically has created what is there. And I don't know, like, I wouldn't say I don't know, maybe creating him is probably the wrong word. I would say he had a play in what transpired next. And like, so if it wasn't the fact that he dismissed Buddy right off, the likelihood is that he probably wouldn't be ending up regretting, being spiteful against Mr. Incredible, and all this probably wouldn't have happened. So he was the cause in that way, and played a part in how things transpired for later in the film. So so that incident takes place, and then we get the headline that Mr. Incredible is going to be sued by all the craziness that happened with Buddy and Bon Voyage and the whole scene that took place there. And I thought this was a very interesting way to go to basically get the supers to stop being super. I thought, because they are now, and it comes to the point where, back in those days, in the 60s and in the 70s, health and safety was never talked about. And the idea of like no win, no fee lawyers, so how easy it is to make, to basically, before the term sue the bastards was used. And so it's a nice jab into that, like, what would happen if superheroes did do something wrong, like I think they played that out also in the Avengers as well, didn't they? Because they didn't, you see all this action and all this, all these buildings blowing up and stuff like that, but they never showed you like what the aftermath of all of that was. And
Yeah, they also played that in Man of Steel, the whole controversy of Superman was causing more damage than he was doing good, and I think that even followed up in Batman versus Superman. There was also that example. We could also talk about the example about Batman not killing the villains, instead of just throwing them over to Arkham Asylum, and then they would escape, and then they would cause more trouble. So yeah, essentially, depending on the case, superheroes, especially how strong they hold their justice, and this, basically what the bad guys would be doing in cause of destruction, yeah, the superheroes would be causing just as much, maybe slightly even more than the bad guys. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is very interesting that Brad Bird was able to bring up the flaws in which sometimes if there's a lot of destruction, then the people are not going to be happy about it. It's not like we're going to have a montage of people cleaning up after the disaster. Yes, people are going to get sued. Yes, millions of dollars are going to be thrown into fixing everything and getting back to normal. Yes, people are going to get injured, maybe killed. So I'm glad that they were able to bring this up. And yeah, it sometimes can't be helped because Mr. Incredible is a very strong guy. And, even though he tries to save people, like that scene in which he's trying to stop the train, there's some people who got injured from the train. We saw a guy with a neck brace, some people having like slings, and they're not really happy about the train accident. And then we have a guy who tries to commit suicide, and then he sues Mr. Incredible because he didn't want to be rescued. He wanted to die, essentially. And then Mr. Incredible was being angry and saying, like, hey, I saved your life. And then the press was being all over. And then it just caused this big disaster involving with the supers having to go into hiding, and they can no longer save people.
There's something that kind of bothers me about that, because, like, instead of, like, suing like, why did he just go, wait till Mr. Incredible went away and then go find another giant building to go jump off? Like, if you think about it, like, why?
I mean,
why?
It's like the cliche with superheroes. It's like, I hear trouble with my super hearing. Oh, my spider sense is tingling. Essentially, like superheroes, they have this intuition. They have a super ability that they can sense danger, and then they go right away. It didn't matter if the guy was going to jump over another building or jump off a bridge. I'm sure that Mr. Incredible, if he was walking around town and he would have seen that, or maybe he was worded by another superhero saying, "Hey, this guy is about to jump off a building. He's probably going to fall. I can't save him with my superpowers. Maybe you can help me out?"
Yeah.
So maybe he was trying to, help with the cause.
No, I don't know. It just sounds a bit strange to me, really. But
Sure, fair enough.
yeah, mind you, it is a. Yeah. Anyway, actually, I had two other thoughts on this as well. Like, imagining Godzilla. Like, where they did, has there ever been a Godzilla film where they actually showed, like, they had, like, a second film where they showed the aftermath of, like, Godzilla destroying the city? So basically saying, like, oh, hey, we're having a debate now over whether what Godzilla did was actually a good thing by, defeating this other monster. Like, he's trampled half the city. He's destroyed pretty much everything. Like, was it a worthy wild cause? When you think about it, like, I would like to see, that would be I don't know, maybe the Godzilla movie actually does exist, but I would actually like to see a Godzilla movie where, people are, like, debating whether Godzilla is actually a force for good if he keeps destroying stuff. So that's something I'd like to see. And then there's a second thought I had as well, but I think that's... oh yeah, on top of that as well, if the way that they set up the Incredibles universe, apparently all supers before they went into hiding were all regulated by the government. So I guess they're going on the... so basically, if Captain America Civil War happened in the same universe as the Incredibles, they'd all be on Iron Man's side, if you think about it, because they're all...
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, because they're all government regulated.
It's a Disney property, right?
Yeah, so because they said, oh well, we're all given consent for the government to regulate us, and we're all looked after by by the government. So obviously we're going to side with Mr. Incredible against Captain America, in that regard. So yeah, that's so. Yeah, maybe Captain America could have used the help, I think. But sorry, no, I mean Iron Man could have used the help. Right. Anyway, 15 years later, in the Incredible story, we've Bob Parr and Helen Parr now are living normal lives. They have 3 children, which is Dash, Jack, and Violet as well. And it's so they're just living a normal family life. And the great thing about this was that do you know, in the first part of the film where the first segment of the film where they show you everything that happened in the 60s, where it's all bright and it's all colorful and it's all adventurous and everything like that, and then the minute they get to 15 years later, it's gray. It's all the color is gone. It's like it's really pale looking if you think about it. So they not only did they get the music right, the sounds right, the acting right, even the presentation of how they animated it and how they colored it was even right. So it's like you see both the contrasts, and I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, it's definitely a great comparison. You have Mr. Parr sitting on a desk and he's listening to an old woman talking about how she's been denied insurance and she's begging for help, and everything around is like all grays and whites, and you can see the look on his face. It's just really, really depressing and just wishing for the good old days. And we even see when we see the boss's office when he's called in after helping give the woman insurance again, you can see the angles of the boss with his really unique styled nose and the way that his pencils are like perfectly lined up, the desk, the wallpaper, everything, it just looks so bleak. And it's definitely a wonderful contrast to the lightly colored and action-packed moments from the first couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm. And I love how they basically put Mr. Incredible in the situation of, like, he's in this situation and there's nothing he can do about it within the confines of what he finds himself in. And so you have the boss in there, and he basically controls the show, and in a way he is a supervillain. if you think about it. Like, he runs this massive company. He's denying people insurance. He's putting so much bureaucracy in the way to basically, every time they have like an accident or have like a house burns down or something like that, they can't do anything about it. And here's Mr. Incredible pretty much doing everything he possibly can to help these people, even when their company, even when like the whole infrastructure won't. So even then, he's still being a superhero in
Yes,
in
yes.
Insuricare. So it's I liked how that happened as well. So
Yes, absolutely. It's great. And also another thing that we even talked about the music just a minute ago. This is the debut of Michael Giacchino, I'm sorry, where we talked about in the previous episode where we were talking about what you call it let's see, what was the music of the, oh yeah, Coco. Yeah, well, he did the music for Coco and Ratatouille, so
mhm.
this was actually his first debut into Pixar doing the music.
Yeah, and what a debut it was. So we played it in the beginning of the
Yeah.
show. And one other thing I actually wanted to note on as well, that when the kids originally in the original pitch really weren't supposed to be there, if you think about it, because in the original pitch. Actually, Syndrome was actually supposed to be announced like at near to the beginning of the movie, because the way that they originally pitched it out was that they were actually going to start with Bob and Helen as this new upstart family, and so you didn't know anything about their superhero ness until like later on in the film, and then the only way you'd find more about it is when Syndrome breaks into their house and starts smashing the place up. And then at the
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
Violet Dash and Jack weren't really supposed to be there because in the original pitch, it was illegal at the time when they were in hiding for them to basically procreate. So
Sure.
this was a change from the original pitch. So they had the kids, and I tell you what, it was a good change. To say the
Yeah, and
least.
some people may even argue that some of the family members weren't given enough screen time. I think we even talked about this with Ratatouille, in which like there wasn't enough time spent on like the lady chef voiced by Jeanine Garofalo,
Oh,
but
Colette.
yeah, yeah, right. So I would think that it does make a lot of sense because in the teaser trailer, we didn't even see the kids at all. We just heard Mr. Incredible and his wife, and that was it. Most likely, the kids weren't even written during that time, and so maybe when Brad Bird he decided to like maybe rewrite Dash, Violet, and Jack into the movie,
Hmm.
it make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the kids have a lot of potential. I think when we come into the second film, and hopefully I know the second film's going to be mostly around Helen, but I really hope Violet, Dash, and Jack also get some kind of screen time as well for to develop themselves. Because I mean,
Who knows?
Violet.
Maybe later on, if The Incredibles 2 does really, really well, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there was like more movies focusing on the other characters.
In This is a popular thing amongst Incredibles fan fiction, but they like the idea that Violet and Syndrome got together. Which I thought,
What?
yeah, that's really strange to me. That there's a fan character right now called Sinlet, who basically, so Violet basically turns on the Incredibles and basically teams up with Syndrome, who's miraculously survives
That
his
doesn't
death.
make any
I
sense.
know it
I mean,
doesn't.
what? I mean, sure. If Violet maybe was feel, I mean, sure. Maybe if Violet in the beginning of the movie was feeling ostracized with her family because she didn't like having superpowers because she felt like she was weird and that she was awkward and shy and she couldn't talk to the guy in school. So maybe if on paper it would be an interesting idea, like you have Syndrome who never had superpowers and yet he wanted to be a superhero, and then you had Violet who has superpowers but doesn't want them. She wants to be feeling normal. It sounds like Hercules in a sense, in which you when he was a teenager and he was awkward and clumsy, he caused a lot of damage. So I mean, maybe if Buddy was a little bit younger, like maybe towards Violet's age, maybe that would make a little bit more sense, that maybe she would go to him for help if she maybe if like there was something going on that she wanted to leave her family. But as it is, that doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, I know. I think it's because, well, I mean, obviously in the current canon, obviously that doesn't make any sense. But I think they talk about when Violet gets older, and she's like when she's like maybe like 19, 20 years old, something like that. So I know even then it doesn't
Sure.
make much sense, but still, it's like yeah, apparently that's a big thing in there. So yeah, so
Yeah, I mean, hey, you know what? You do you. That's what I say.
and yeah, and we shouldn't really, obviously, people say I don't really like to criticize fan fiction, so I just let it go wherever it wants. So that's a
Sure.
disclaimer there.
I'm
So
not. I'm not a judge of fanfic.
yeah.
So you know what? Just do what you want to do.
Okay, so like their parents, Violet and Dash have their own powers. Violet can turn invisible and create force fields, and Dash can run at breakneck speeds. So I mean, I like how their characters match their powers. So Violet is invisible to like
Yeah,
her
she's invisible.
surroundings.
She can create force fields, and Dash is essentially a child version of the Flash, not to be confused with Kid Flash.
Yeah, but he's like your
And Jack is a. Go ahead.
yeah, but it's a bit. Dash is like your typical like Riddling kid. Like I remember being talked about by in the Incredibles documentary. So he's very hyperactive. He's very hard to very hard to keep attention. And you notice that because he does all his pranks with the teacher in the opening. Because he gets sent to the principal's office. So for that, so they really play that out with him, and Jack's basically just it's in his name, Jack of all trades. So he's this little kid of like full potential. No one knows what he can do yet. So
Right,
it's
right.
that's the reason why he does all the powers that he does. And but I like Violet how her powers basically reflect her personality, at least in the beginning anyway. And then I mean, we'll talk about a bit later about what her character development is, but still. So Bob's frustrated. He's overweight. He's got this really crappy job, and then he ends up losing it because he finally
Yeah, he
gets.
loses it. Yeah, exactly. He loses it because he sees a person getting mugged, and he wants to rush over and help them, and his boss is telling him, "No, you are going to stay right here, and you are not going to leave this office." But he wants to, but unfortunately he can't, because if he doesn't, if he leaves, then he's going to get fired. But then the person ends up getting mugged, and then he gets so upset that he actually throws something, and he starts destroying a whole bunch of things, and he gets fired right off the spot. And Mr. Incredible is pretty much just at his lowest point, and he just wishes for the good old days when he was a superhero.
Yeah, and I like. I mean, Rick Dicker then comes in, and he's sort of. I don't know how to feel about Rick Dicker because he kind of feels like he's there for plot convenience. In a way, because if you think about it, like he's like saying, oh, I have to erase memories, and like I'm the guy who make sure that I clean up and everything like that, and I relocate people and stuff like that. And I mean, you don't really
I
know
mean,
too much.
I mean, sure, maybe it is for plot convenience, but it does kind of open up the world in the fact that, okay, these supers are in hiding. We need to understand about the process of how it happens. Their names are changed, they're moved over to different locations, and they can't reveal on who they are and what kind of abilities that they have. Otherwise, they'll get into severe trouble with the government.
Yeah,
And so, yes, it is maybe for plot convenience, but at least it gives us a little bit more understanding about how the supers world works.
yeah, but I would have liked to have known a bit more about him if and like, yeah, I do get he's supposed to be kind of like he's part of like the Secret Service, so maybe like that's part of his aura. Like you're not really supposed to know too much about him, but it would have been nice
Exactly. I
if
kind of think of him like the guy from Lilo and Stitch, who is there for like child support, who's visiting Lilo and Nani, and how their situation is at, and if Lilo needs to be moved over to a different family if Nani is not able to take care of her. So, I mean, he didn't really have a backstory either. He was just filling out that purpose.
So yeah, it would have been nice to see a bit more about, kind of flesh out more of his. I know we probably would have been cut for time if they'd even got to that point, but yeah, it would have been nice to hear a bit more about how he got involved. And I know there's extras in in the special edition DVD where you can see he listens to recordings of them talking to superheroes and how they're all related and stuff. So I mean they get more, but if we're talking about Rick Dicker in the context of the movie, he doesn't really get that much development in this.
No, he doesn't. But then again, if we would have given him more development, I'm sure it would have taken a lot from the other characters who deserve development.
So he's now in the situation where he's unemployed, and he's refused. He basically said it's a ridiculous. Look, I'll figure this out all on my own. And then he gets he ends up with a mysterious letter from someone called Mirage. And this, Mirage is actually quite interesting. Actually, I do like Mirage, and though there are some people who don't, and but I
Yeah,
do.
yeah, that's fair enough. She's not going to be in the second movie. I guess it makes a lot of sense, partly because the voice actress behind her passed away a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a shame. And the one thing I would have liked to have seen with Mirage, and that is that if they did like an Incredibles TV series, like I would have liked to have to have been like the person who is like in a control room or like at the headquarters, and like she's like feeding information to the Incredibles. And like she says, oh, if you want to defeat this guy, you've got to do this, and like, oh, you want to get over there pretty quickly, and like, be that kind of like, oh, who's like, I don't know if you ever watched Centurions, and so that she's like,
Oh my god, I haven't
yeah,
heard of that show in years. My
yeah,
god.
Man and Machine Power Extreme, and she's like, I've forgotten the name of the woman in there, but kind of like her in a way, and like, she
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
she's directing operations in that way, and yeah, that from Skyvault, and that would have been pretty cool if she did
Yes.
that. So, but hey,
Absolutely.
yeah. So Mirage offers Mr. Incredible a job, going back to being in the good old days, and it results in Bob basically putting back on the old Mr. Incredible suit, and I love how they've done it where he's so overweight he barely fits his suit anymore, and like and you can see just the
Yeah, it
bulge
makes a lot of
coming
sense.
up.
I think even in
Yeah.
the DVD, where they list off like the title for each of the DVDs, like chapter one is this title, chapter two is this title. I think if you want to know how much weight he's gained, on the DVD chapter it says 15 years and 60 pounds later.
Oh my goodness! And also on top of that as well, did you know in like the modeling phase, they had to because there's so many like characters actually in the Incredible movie. The reason why the Incredibles to me is so huge is just the amount of characters they had to design. They had to basically create somebody called Universal Man. Like this one man.
Insert "They Might Be Giants" song here.
Yeah.
Particle Man.
Yeah. So
Universe Man.
yeah.
Universe Man does what it. Okay, I'm done.
So they had to create a model called Universal Man, and basically they had to like just randomly create like different characters out of like this model called Universal Man, and so that's the reason why you see so many different variation of characters, and it's all the same person. Like they based it on the same model, and but
Yeah.
with Mr. Incredible and with all the other characters, they had so many challenges to come across, including even putting 60 pounds on Mr. Incredible, because he's actually a completely different model from the other model that was there, because he's got so
Yeah,
much
exactly.
other
Because
flab on him
he's
now.
a lot more nimble, and he has like a smaller chin, and his like his waist and his legs and his arms are a lot more nimble, and they have like developed muscle tone. And then when you look in the very first scene at the office, you can tell that his face has gotten bigger. Like he has a much bigger chest. His arms are a lot more bulkier. So they had to do a lot more model, design for each of the characters and how much they've aged. Another thing that we neglected to discuss about is that this is the very first Pixar movie that had humans as the main characters.
Hmm. And you can tell how much challenge they had in doing that, because you had it was shifting in time from different time periods, and on top of that you had and in order to make it more believable, so you had to create, I think, probably like 3 different models of Mr. Incredible, if you think about it. So you had to have him when he was in his youth, you had to have him when he was obviously fat and overweight and miserable, and then you had him basically go through his redemption, if you will, of like him getting in shape and then basically building him on that. So there was a lot of technical challenges, and so you can kind of understand why even in this, like that's basically what makes the whole thing even more epic, because not only did they do human characters, but they had to do human characters who went through several stages of evolution, character wise and physical wise. So
Yeah, exactly. And this was and it makes a lot of sense too, because because with humans they have they change, they look different as the years pass. Toys wouldn't be that case. Neither would Bugs. And let's see, Monsters Inc. I'm sure they would have been roughly the same. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about Monsters University another time. Toy Story 2, same thing. Finding Nemo, yeah, fish, they would change relatively in size, but not by much. Humans are a much more complex way of showing how much time has changed and how much a body um, or like personalities have changed over time. And with this movie being Brad Bird's very first movie done in CGI, and especially since he had just come out of a huge not critical, a financial flop with the Iron Giant, I'm sure that him having to try to do a movie for Pixar after dealing with a big financial failure and essentially being partly responsible for the shutdown of Warner Brothers Animation Studio. I'm sure that this probably wasn't easy for him. I'm sure that maybe The Incredibles, in a sense, was kind of like his own therapeutic way of rising from the bottom and getting to the top, similar to Mr. Incredible.
Yeah, after you see the Iron Giant, like years after that happened, it's like you do feel bad because it's like it is
Yeah, in
actually
fact,
a deal.
in fact, I highly recommend that you check out this amazing like oral history of the Iron Giant. I'm sure that maybe I'll give a link into the description box below, or maybe I can tweet it or something. But like it was like was written like almost like the 15-year anniversary of the Iron Giant or something, or maybe when it was coming out on Blu-ray or when it was being released on theaters or something. But yeah, really interesting oral history with Brad Bird and a lot of the animators and the storyboard artists and directors discussing about the makings of the Iron Giant, the financial failure of the movie, and then noticing that the movie's reputation has grown over the years and became like dubbed as one of the best animated movies ever made.
And go see the Iron Giant as well because it's like it's maybe a bit too late to save Warner Brothers Animation Studio, but you can still go see it was still made, so it's still out there somewhere.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Omnidroid 8. And that I guess you could say was kind of like the I guess a side villain of the film because as the Omnidroid evolved through its creation, it kind of gathered a character of its own. If you think, because it was obviously AI, it was like a learning robot. So in a way, the Omnidroid wasn't just a machine. In a way, it was kind of a character of its own in a way because it was just it was so
Yes,
menacing.
absolutely. I mean, for a while, we thought that that was the main villain. We thought that because Mirage was talking about that there was this machine that was constantly learning every time that a superhero fights it, and nobody can be able to defeat it. We thought that that was going to be like the main villain. It's like who is responsible for the creation of this robot. But we have this amazing fight scene with the robot and Mr. Incredible when they head over to like the volcano, and we see
And Mr. Incredible throwing out his back.
Yeah, he broke out his back, and he's trying to like get himself back up, and then the robot is like pulling on him, and then eventually like it undoes his back, and then he fights it and he destroys it and throws it into the lava thinking that it's over, but it's far from it because somebody is watching in the background and is really impressed with Mr. Incredible's fighting.
Yeah, this is a
Who
thing.
It be?
Yeah, the one thing I want to say about Mr. Incredible in that fight scene is that I'm very glad that they showed that he could get injured and that he can get hurt because because in the beginning they kind of made him look like he was just basically indestructible and he was kind of like a lot like Superman and dare I say
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad they didn't. I mean, I know, with Elsa, that like they made her like a power kind of like, unpredictable with like with a like frozen with like her ice powers. I'm really glad that they showed vulnerabilities to Mr. Incredible because I kind of thinking they probably would have ended up kind of like having the same reputation in a way of like he's Mr. Incredible, he can't get hurt. Like it's like what were we worried about all this time? Like,
and you know what? I mean, we can debate for a long time about Superman because a lot of people feel that Superman doesn't belong in our time. Where he's like practically indestructible and nothing can hurt him. If you want to do something similar but done right, Saitama from One Punch Man is a great example. He's practically indestructible, but he has so many flaws to the character that that's what makes him really interesting. So
Mhm.
you can be able to pull off vulnerability, whether it be like, oh, you're not perfect, but you're a superhero, in a good sense.
Yeah. Do you think? What was your opinion on Hancock? You know that Will Smith film. Well, like he was a superhero, but basically he
Oh
was a he
yeah.
was a
Oh my
massive
God.
bum.
I remember when I first heard about that movie and everybody was talking about it, but then eventually it just kind of like came and went really quickly.
Yeah.
I think that they were trying to do something similar to The Incredibles, in which, it's a world based off of superheroes, but in this case, superheroes are um they're kind of like really, really rare, and Hancock is like acting like this complete jerk who has these powers but is like really selfish. And yeah, I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but I kind of understand where they were going with the concept, but I just felt like the execution was hit and miss at points.
Yeah. I think I don't think there's another film that kind of came into my came in, that's came and went as well.
I mean, I guess
Oh,
Fantastic
like
Four would also be another example, because the
yeah.
Fantastic Four movies came out like a few years after The Incredibles.
Hmm.
And, it was supposed to be like, oh, the Fantastic Four is back, because the last time that we saw the Fantastic Four in any way was the 90s animated series, but that was completely overshadowed with the likes of Batman, X-Men, Superman, a whole bunch of others. So, yeah, even the Fantastic Four movies didn't exactly work out very well in that sense. And, let me see if I can think of anything else. Oh, what was it, like? Watcher or Looker or something like that. That movie with
Yeah.
Angelina Jolie, and they have like Matrix like powers in which they can be able to like dodge or shoot things really well. That
Basically
movie
Matrix.
that also came and went really quickly.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to we got massively over track. I've just realised. So we
Yeah,
got
yeah,
we.
yeah. And I'm sorry, everybody. When
Hey,
you're going through a topic like this, I mean, it's really hard to like stay on track. And also, I know a lot of people are going to mention this in the comments. Chronicle as another
Chronicle.
example. So, okay, we're done.
Yeah. So we got the Omnidroid fight, and do you think Syndrome? Obviously, we don't know it's Syndrome. We just know him as like the mysterious guy. But do you think he was introduced in that silhouette a bit too soon? I mean, would it have been better if he just kind of kept his anonymity, throughout that, and he didn't
Yeah,
really, you didn't
I
really
definitely
hit
do
him?
agree. It would have been nice if maybe we would have known about him a little bit later throughout the movie. I mean, at first it seemed that way because, Mr. Incredible and Mirage are having a nice dinner together, and then she says, "Oh, my boss is unable to show up. He's really busy with stuff."
Hmm.
And then, like much later on, we have the robot coming back, and he's like incredibly indestructible. Like Mr. Incredible can't fight him, and maybe we would have been introduced to Syndrome a little bit later. Like maybe he would have
Yeah,
like fought
I
him
mean, having
personally,
him.
or
The one thing that annoyed me is that when he talked, because when he said like, "Oh, he's very impressive," it's like, "Oh, he's like the buddy sidekick, and like he's come back as like the as the villain." Not to say that obviously we saw the adverts and everything, like all the commercials and that for it, and we already know who Syndrome was before walking in. But it would have been nice if they basically had him only like in silhouette and didn't have him talk yet, because you could still not kind of guess that he was Buddy from like in the beginning of the film, and then they could have like just announced that when the Omnidroid attacked Mister Incredible again and nearly killed him, they could have brought in Syndrome and
or
then
maybe
announced
like
him in
when he
that
was
way.
trying to
Rather,
do research on the robot, and maybe like looking through the blueprints like he did in the beginning of the movie. Like maybe like if he was to look to see who was behind it all, and then it shows Syndrome for the very first time, and maybe he came like right behind him, and then you find out who Syndrome was. That would also been really cool too.
yeah, it might have. I don't know. It's like they would have had to remove though the scene where he's on the computer, kind of a bit further forward through the film, because when that's because in the well, we'll move on to that in a minute, but so we've had that, and we have the dinner scene with Mirage and Mister Incredible, and then basically it looks like Bob Parr is putting on a facade of like he's still working in insurance carriers, and that he's rolling up in the company. So
Yeah,
and
and also eventually his superhero suit starts to wane down, and it has like a huge hole by the shoulder, and so he decides to call Edna Mode, who designs all the superhero costumes back in the day. And
mhm.
then he starts visiting her. She's really small and she has like a lot of personality, and she's voiced by Brad Bird himself.
Brad
And
Bird is brilliant as Edna. I love this character. I really do. Like,
yeah, me
she's
too.
this tiny
You
little.
want to know
She's
something?
here's the
I just
thing.
saw Edna a few days ago in like a fashion magazine. How often
Awesome,
can you say that?
oh, that's amazing. But here's another thing as well. Like, you have Edna Mode. She is this massively smaller than every other super in the show, in the movie, and everybody is terrified of her. And it's based all on her personality alone, and that's what's so that's what I love about characters when their personalities alone control what goes on in like bigger, mightier characters. And like, as you know, when that's happening, like, you're looking at somebody who you want to pay attention to on the screen. And that's what that's why many people like quote Edna when they say no capes and things like that. It's like,
Yes, no capes.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's brilliant. And so he gets the suit repaired, and then Edna offers to give him a brand new suit, and and they ends up doing that, and so that's he goes from the black and blue suit to the iconic red suit that we were introduced to at the very beginning of all of this. So
Yeah, and that's the suit that we first see in the teaser trailer. I wasn't sure if maybe they thought from the very beginning that he was gonna have the blue suit or the red suit. So yeah, now we're more familiar with the red suit that he wears throughout the majority of the movie.
yeah, it's kind of funny though because it's like it would be interesting to see if they did actually start off with the red suit and then they moved on to like maybe the blue, the kind of like the blue and black suit, and they kind of did like a whole like kind of like a Batman Beyond kind of like deal, like in the Batman Beyond obviously he goes from gray to black to like black to red in Batman
Yeah,
Beyond,
yeah,
and yeah,
exactly.
I guess it would be nice if they had like kind of like that kind of thing going on, but I guess they went with this direction anyway. So are we to the part where Helen starts to get suspicious of what's going on
Yeah,
because
so Helen is calling Bob's job office and wondering about where he's at. She wants to know more information because she got very little of it with the hotel phone number that she was given.
Mhm.
And they were telling her that Bob was no longer working for them for months, actually. And then she gets really concerned about what's going on. Where's my husband? And so then she calls Edna because, he and her had a history together and maybe she would know something. And she does. Not only did she invite,
Well,
Helen
what
over
gives her
to
suspicion is the
her
super.
place. And
Keep in mind, what provoked her suspicion to begin with was the super suit because she notices that it's actually been repaired, and the only
right,
way that she
exactly.
could,
Like for example, like the stitching is a different color. It's a
yeah,
lighter blue than a regular blue that we've seen.
yeah, and so that's what makes points Helen in the direction of Edna because the only person who knows how to patch a super suit is Edna, and so
Right.
that's that thing,
And
and
so while she visits Edna, Edna's showing off all of the new suits that she made for her, for Jack Jack, Violet, and for Dash. And
yeah.
she's like really shocked about this. Like, hey, we retired as superheroes. Why are you making us all these suits? And then Edna surprises, like, you don't know where your husband is? And then she put in like a tracking device on him, on
Yeah.
his suit, and then when she finds out, she's really devastated.
Yeah. Do you know what annoys me in this kind of like in this segment of the movie? That like Helen, does not like the idea that she's created all the suits, but she takes them anyway. I mean, what's the motivation to take the suit? Take Violet and Dash's suit. I don't understand why she did that. I mean, wouldn't you think you'd keep them
I
with
don't know.
Edna?
Maybe Edna forced her to take it. It's like, you take suits. You
Yeah.
take suits. I made them. you take suits.
Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe she
I
thought
felt
that they
that.
were actually superheroes, that they
Yeah.
never retired.
I,
And maybe Helen was like so frightened of Edna that she didn't want to disappoint her, so she had to take the suits anyway.
Maybe. I felt there was a scene missing there a little bit, and maybe it was cut for time. I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
but
yeah, I definitely do agree.
yeah. So we get to the point where actually there is a character that's been cut in this film, and that was what was his name? Well, and we even blank out on his name.
Gazer beam.
No, not Gazer Beam. It was the guy who flies Helen to her missions because obviously
Oh yeah, yeah,
Elastigirl can't
yeah.
fly.
Yeah,
So
you're right. He's the one that offered Helen the plane so that she can be able to go over to the island where Bob is at. Yeah.
yeah, so I completely blank on his name. So put it in the comment section below if you remember who it is. But we. So that they cut the character. He does get some lines, but and I'm actually kind of glad he was kind of cut out because like he was supposed to die like in the plane crash in that, and but they haven't given enough screen time for us to even care about him. So it's like it'll be like if he like appeared like here and there in the movie, and like and they gave him like something to kind of like make him really warm and fuzzy with us, like make him like make us kind of care about him. Then maybe if they did have him in the movie and then killed him, maybe we would have cared. But yeah, I'm really glad they kind of cut his time to like only like 2 sentences, and then had
Yeah, that is true. I mean, what kind of we wouldn't have probably known about him, and maybe like for like a couple of minutes, and even then, it would have been him and Helen, and then she would eventually find out that Dash and Violet had stowed away on the plane. So yeah, I'm sure that maybe we would have had like a few minutes with them talking and like looking back on their past. But yeah, it definitely was cut for time, and I guess it is a good thing that it did, because then we wouldn't get more on Dash's or Violet's backstory and development as superheroes throughout the movie.
So Helen and Dash and Violet are all on the plane. The plane gets shot down by Syndrome, and then that's the point where Mr. Incredible thinks that they're all dead. After that, because he hears everything that happens, and it's to the point where he grabs Mirage and threatens to kill her, and Syndrome says, "Okay, show me." And even at that point, Mr. Incredible can't do it and lets her go. And it's like,
yeah, in fact, we've neglected to talk about that. Out of the Pixar movies, this one is a lot more serious than the others.
yeah.
I mean, sure, Finding Nemo was also another one that does have a good balance of jokes and humor, but this one, it doesn't talk down to kids. This one, it treats it very seriously, especially with a scene that we'll talk about a little later. But we have the scene where Bob and Helen are arguing about how he missed out on his on Dash's fourth grade graduation, and saying like, oh, that's not a graduation, it's just a participation award or something. And
They're finding new ways to celebrate mediocrity.
Yeah, exactly. It's it definitely is what made Pixar a major standout back then, because Disney, they always talk about like, if you wish really hard, your dreams will come true and stuff like that. But here, it shows us that life isn't perfect. It can get really dramatic. It can get really serious. Things don't always go your way, but it's okay, because that's how life is. And I think that's what made Pixar really strong back then.
So let me just I say I had a thought in my head, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. But so I mean, we have we have the moment where Mr. Incredible has his really dark moments, and then obviously he can't go through with it. And it is I like this scene where Syndrome is saying, "Hey, look, I was just putting on a show for and he wasn't actually going to do it. I was playing on his emotions." And then his Mirage just snaps him and says, "Next time you do that, bet your own life." And yeah, that was a nice rebuttal, I thought, to Syndrome, and I thought it made
Yeah, Syndrome actually has some really good lines when he gets really, really serious.
So we get to the point where I mean, there was an important scene on the plane that we did actually miss, and that was when Helen put too much pressure on Violet, and she couldn't like make a big enough force field basically to protect them from the missiles, and then you get this really very somber moment between Violet and Elastigirl, between the mom and daughter. That she felt like she demanded too much from Violet too quickly, and then that's at the point where
I
you
mean,
see,
in a sense, she kind of did because,
yeah,
with Dash, it makes a lot of sense that he would be natural with his powers because he's not afraid to showcase it. But somebody like Violet, who was incredibly shy and is kind of ashamed of her superpowers because she feels like she's not like everybody else, it makes a lot of sense why she didn't get as much training with her force fields compared to Dash, where he just runs really fast a lot.
So I like this scene because it basically brings this is gonna be this is gonna be interesting. Like in the second film, is Violet gonna have a superhero name? Because
Oh,
can she really be? I mean, I guess they could call her Ultraviolet, maybe, and
oh, that'd be nice. Yeah.
maybe.
Dash, I don't think he really needs too much of a superhero name, but
No.
yeah, it would be really nice if maybe Violet could get a superhero name, absolutely. And I also love the scene in which when Helen is talking to her kids, saying like, those guys on the TV shows that you used to watch, where they were the bad guys and stuff. Like these will like they're not like those. They will kill you even if you're little kids. So you have to be
Yeah.
really careful. And she's talking to them like a mother would. She's telling them you have to stay strong and you have to protect yourselves because those people out there, they're not going to take it easy on you because you're little kids. They're going to kill you.
That's a great speech. Actually, from Helen, and again, like you were saying before, it's not talking down to kids. It's basically saying it's showing a realistic scenario. Like these bad guys are dangerous. They will kill you. This is not like in a Saturday morning cartoon show. It's like
Right, exactly.
that was brilliant.
That's another great scene, and especially when she's talking to Violet about how she apologizes for pushing her too much, and that when don't push yourself if you're not ready to showcase your powers. You haven't fully developed them yet, and when you do, then you'll know. And
Yeah.
that's another great scene because as superheroes, we're always pressured into expecting like, oh, they're superheroes. They're supposed to save people. They're supposed to be great, but maybe sometimes there are cases in which a superhero doesn't fully develop their powers until they're ready or they get more training from it. Danny Phantom, for example, in which when he starts developing his powers, it becomes really awkward for him. Like his pants start falling down. He doesn't know how to fully fight off the bad guys when they come through the ghost world. It took until like a couple of seasons in which he develops more powers and he gets a full grasp on the ghost form. So there's a great example on that. And you could also argue about a couple of other things, Sky High, My Hero Academia, in which they also had to deal with no powers, and then eventually they would get powers, and they tried to strengthen themselves compared to like the main superheroes who do have powers, and they are much more stronger than the main protagonist.
So, Elastigirl infiltrates the base, and she actually sees. I like how they basically do this montage of basically showing what's going on in the base. So you can see like the giant rocket, like what's going on there, and then on side of that you have you also have Dash and Violet, Violet trying to basically get hold of her powers, and you can see that she's actually put her hair back as well. So you can see that she's becoming a lot more. She's coming out of her shell quite a lot more. And then you have Dash, who basically just he thinks he's there for like some kind of vacation or something like that, and he's playing all that up, and that's really enjoyable to watch. So
Yeah,
isn't this the great thing about this movie? Every single character, you're interested in what's going on with them. Like, even to the part where I'm even saying that I want some more character development from Rick Dicker. It's like, it's everyone here
yeah,
feels
and,
like
and
they're
there's a reason
relevant.
why we want more character interactions because they're so interesting to begin with.
So we get to the point where Helen finally finds Mr. Incredible, or Mirage goes to Mr. Incredible's cell, and he lets him out. And then it looks like Mr. Incredible is actually going to kill Mirage, after letting him go. And so, but then she tells him before she gets choked out that they survive the crash. And then we get the very awkward moments of him hugging her and then Helen finding them basically together. So, which she was suspecting
Yeah,
that,
and also another thing that I must say is that both of them, they both have really cool stealth scenes, like Mr. Incredible trying to look through the blueprints, and and Elastigirl trying to find Mr. Incredible. Like, she has like these really cool stealth scenes where she kind of like twists her body around, and she's like trying to get the keys and trying to open through the doors. So and then eventually, when she does find Mr. Incredible hugging Mirage, and it's really awkward.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Elastigirl's infiltration is probably more stealthy than Mr. Incredible's was, even though she was caught a couple of times. Because if you notice that, Mr. Incredible was like throwing stuff at people while he was trying to get in. So in a way, he wasn't really that stealthy when you think about it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Solid Snake if he was like shooting the tranquilizer darts into the people so they can fall asleep. In this case, it's Mr. Incredible throwing coconuts far away and them getting knocked out.
Yeah, shake your coconuts, go. Oh, well, I'll remind you of junior, senior, but okay. So yeah, so we get to that point, and then we get this kind of old married couple kind of like arguing between Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl, and like the fact that she's saying about how he's lied to her and stuff like that, and he's like he's just relieved that they're just alive and stuff, and then they trigger off. Violet and Josh then trigger off the alerts on the island, and then they're being chased. And this whole scene is brilliant, I think. With Violet, having to use her powers to like hide away and sneak up on guards, and you got Dash having to like run like a million miles an hour to get away from like these like blender kind of like devices, like these ships that are cutting down trees and like slicing up things and stuff like that. And then there's the bit where they get to the water, and then you wonder what's going to happen, and you realize that Dash can run on water, which I thought which is a great reveal. I thought that was pretty brilliant. And then there's also the bit where he has the fight scene with one of the guards, where he can actually quickly dodge guards and be able to like put in like punches of his own. And I think that's pretty ballsy for something for like Disney, because how much obviously it's kind of comedic violence, but in a way it is like how many times have we seen Disney films where kids are like rapidly punching other guys, if you think about it.
None, absolutely none whatsoever.
So that stands out. So that's really cool. And eventually then they all come together, and I really hate when they do this, because they showed like all the individual like powers and like individual what they can do, but then they really cut when they get into the part where they're all like together and like they're all like fighting like all the guards and stuff like that, and then Syndrome just comes in and stops the whole thing. It's like I gotta be honest, I was actually kind of disappointed at that. I would have felt more.
Exactly, because we didn't get enough time for them to fight as a family until much later on. But then Syndrome is like, whoa, time out. And then he finds out that, alongside with Mr. Incredible is Elastigirl, and they have kids, or as Syndrome says, and got busy.
Oh man, and so I found that bit I think that's the only negative I would say about this film, is why. I mean, I would have let it go on for at least a little bit longer and let everyone kind of absorb it a little bit more, and then you have Syndrome come in and stop it all. It's like I don't think there was enough to. I think there was enough time to kind of appreciate it, and that kind of I thought that disappointed me a little bit, really. Like you just cut it off at that point. And so, because
I guess maybe they were running out of time.
Maybe. So they're all locked up now, and Syndrome does the monologue of basically saying that he's going to be the superhero that saves the day from the Omnidroid, because the Omnidroid's going to get launched at the city, and he's going to go in there and basically pretend to be a superhero and save them all. And throughout this time, he actually, Mr. Incredible finds out that he's actually killed all the I don't know. Like in that whole montage where he's looking through the computer and you realize all these superheroes have died, fighting these Omnidroids. And it makes me wonder, basically, are all the supers now dead, and the only supers now that exist in this whole thing is now just either Frozone, Mr. Incredible, and his family? Thinking
You
about it.
know, that would be an interesting question. I'm sure that the sequel will bring it up, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a chance in which maybe there are a few superheroes that are not found, or you're right, maybe most of them have died.
Yeah, and surely that I'm really just thinking. So right here, surely they might. If these superheroes are there, I mean, like, surely they must not. They exist within the world. Surely there must be like other superheroes as well, like across the globe. Like, if you think
Sure.
about it. So I don't know. It's like it'll be very interesting. I would like to see the Incredibles 2 address that. Like, what is the status of superheroes? Are supers back now? Like, are they all? Are they all like? Are new superheroes coming out? At the same time as the
Yeah,
Incredibles are?
exactly. Because isn't the sequel supposed to take place like immediately after the first one, where we get to see the fight with the Mole Man?
It looks like it, so yeah, and I'll tell you what, that's going to create a massive continuity error for the video game, if that's the case. Because if you notice, like, there was
That's
a
right, because the video game actually continued off from
off,
the ending of the movie. You're right.
yeah, and like I really hope that they're not going to base it on the video game because the video game was
I
basically just them
doubt it.
fighting the
I seriously
Underminer.
doubt it. I mean, trust me, if we had to wait almost 15 years and they were going to just take the game straight from the video game, I'm sure that they would have been like really disappointed.
Yeah, so hey, let's see where they go from there. But anyway, going back to
Mhm.
this, so the Omni Droid is launched at the city. It's destroy, basically it's wreaking havoc across the whole place, and basically Syndrome is going to come in and save the day, and pretending to be a superhero and stop the Omni Droid. Only that it doesn't go so well, and because again at the end of the day, it's a learning robot, so it learns that the remote control that Syndrome has over the Omni Droid is its weakness, and it learns basically to shoot it off and basically eliminate Syndrome. So, but he doesn't die in this bit. He basically just gets knocked out, and basically he's out for that whole scene. So I thought it was
Yeah,
uh,
and then of course we have the infamous scene that people still talk about to this day. That we have, Frozone looking for his super suit, and he can't find it because his wife put it somewhere else, and they were gonna go out on a date for dinner, and then she was saying like, "I don't know where I put it. I'm your wife. I'm the best thing that you'll ever have," and
you're
he's
telling me
trying
my
to
suit is
find
woman.
the super suit.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. It's like, honey, where is my super suit? He's like, I put it away. Where? And like the whole place is just getting destroyed, and like, it's brilliant. And mind you, it's like, I'm really surprised that he quickly, immediately went to, his super suit because it's like, I wonder what, because I thought,
Actually happens.
yeah, actually happens in that one, yeah. So, the whole thing is taking place, and then the Incredibles do finally get out with the help of Mirage, and also actually I'll tell you what, there is an important bit before that scene, and that's when Mr. Incredible monologues about how selfish he's been and realizes how stupid he's been and how he's missed out on everyone, missed out on his family basically. So that was a good scene, and then during that whole time, Violet manages to free herself using her force field powers and be able to free her entire family as well. So then Mirage
Hmm.
gets them on the rocket, and then we obviously get that's how they get from there to that, and they do have some really funny family scenes. So like you have like when they get in the van and they're trying to drive to the location, and then they're arguing about what exit to take when they're driving down the highway and stuff. And so they throw in like the really cool comedic, they make these amazingly comedic scenes with that as well. So there's that, and then
Yeah, and then of course it gets like really.
yeah,
Oh
no, go on. Sorry. Oh, okay. So we get to the point where Mr. Incredible is going to fight him on their own, and like then they have another tiff over like that, and then Mr. Incredible basically just breaks the whole thing up and says, "Look, Helen, I can't lose you again," and he says, I'm not strong enough to lose you," and that's a nice romantic moment for that. So.
yeah, it is very romantic. Yes,
Mm.
and also, have you seen the most recent episode of Film Theory that MatPat did discussing about who was the stronger Incredible?
Well, no, actually, I've not seen that yet. What was his conclusion?
Well, it had to do with like calculating, basically like newtons and the strength of each of the situations that they were going at through the movie. And for a while, his deduction would have been violence because she was able to hold the pressure from the robot when they were almost about to crush them. And Mr. Incredible could barely like hold on to the train from the beginning of the movie, and then then he finally comes to the conclusion that no, Mr. Incredible is actually the strongest because he was able to lift it. And the reason why is because he saw that his kids were in danger, and that was able to give him the strength so that he could be able to lift the robot out of the way when they were almost about to be crushed. And it actually brings up a really interesting example about how in some cases, there's been like various news articles about like people lifting up cars if their kids are in trouble, like if they're under the car and they're stuck, or if they're trapped in the car when the car's on fire and they can't get out, and they're able to like do like incredibly strong things that they wouldn't do normally. It's possibly due to the adrenaline that is like pumping into your body, and it's like a strong intuition to save your family in this time of crisis. And we see Mr. Incredible talking about like how he's not strong enough and that he wants to protect his family. He's able to become at his absolute strongest because he's with his family. He has a reason to fight off against this robot other than just he needs to save the city from destruction. He's doing it alongside with his family, and that's where he becomes his absolute strongest.
Mm-hmm. So, I think that's yeah, actually, I never really thought about that, actually. So
I didn't think about that either, so kudos to Matt Pat.
Well, kudos indeed. So we get the fight scene, and so you get Elastigirl taking out its gun by slingshotting a manhole cover, and then you get Frozone coming in, and he comes in. I do like this scene, and even though it is a bit they don't really they kind of like do their own individual things, kind of like to defeat the Omnidroid. So you get Dash running away with a remote control, and as the Omnidroid's trying to chase after him and stuff, and then you get Frozone coming in with that, and you see Mr. Incredible getting thrown around again, and basically being like a human wrecking ball, smashing things up, and and then they realize the only thing that's strong enough to basically destroy it is itself. So they manage to get one of its claws off, launch it into the machine, and then basically that destroys the robot. And then you get there is I completely forget their names, but they recently passed. They actually tell you what I
know what you're talking about. You're talking about Frank and Ollie, right?
Yeah, Frank and Ollie, because they had like a bit where they no school like the old school, and then they passed away.
Yeah, they were, for those who don't know, Frank and Ollie were two of the 9 old men who worked in Walt Disney World from like the 30s. They were responsible for helping with the likes of like Sleeping Beauty and Robin Hood and Cinderella. And there's this really amazing documentary called Frank and Ollie that I highly recommend that you guys check out. I saw it in independent theater, and it's great. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's a really fascinating story about how they lived next door to each other as neighbors, and how they were really close friends, and about how they were a part of Disney's legacy. And also they did appear in another Brad Bird movie. They were the 2 old men that Kent was interrogating in The Iron Giants when they were questioning about what was the destruction, and then one of the old men said it was a giant metal man, and then Kent is asking about like, is there somewhere I could get a telephone, and then they point to the direction of Hogarth's house. So this is I guess Brad Bird was like really close to Frank and Ollie, and he decided to have them as another cameo.
Yep. So the battle is over, and then Rick Dicker drives them all home, and he says they frozen all for Syndrome's assets and put in a warrant out for his arrest. And so Elastigirl's listening to her messages, and then they realize that the babysitter that they had sitting for Jack has told them that another babysitter is there, even though that Helen said that she didn't ask for another one. And so they fear the worst. They go into the house, and they realize that Syndrome has captured Jack, and freeze them before they can do anything about it. I love the camera work in this, because you're actually running into the house with the Incredibles when this when this whole thing happens.
And you're wondering like what's going on, and then eventually Syndrome immediately freezes them, and he's just holding the baby, and he says he's going to take him away and raise him to be a villain, and to teach him a whole bunch of lessons. And It's actually a really great scene, and if you're wondering of what happened between the babysitter and Jack Jack, there is an incredible short that I think comes along in the DVD where you can actually see Jack Jack um, causing a lot of trouble with the babysitter, and then eventually Syndrome coming along, and then he says, "I'm the new babysitter,"
Hmm.
and then she's like, "Well, I don't think you're a babysitter. You don't look like a babysitter." And then he says, "Oh, the S stands for sitter. I would put BS in there, but that would be the wrong indication."
I swear that must have been improv. I think that line is like it's like there's part of me that believes that was probably improv when they
I
put
would
that
be
in. It's like,
surprised.
yeah, that would be great. So you get Jack Jack attack in that as well, and that's that whole thing. So then we see the death of Syndrome, and it comes as I think this part they're actually not very aware that Jack Jack actually has any powers, and so it's all taking place up in the air, and they don't know what's going on. So
No, they don't. They just see that Syndrome is like acting crazy, and then we have Jack Jack, setting himself on fire, turning into metal, turning
Hulk,
into like this crazy little red monster,
hulking
and
out.
he starts attacking. Yeah, he starts freaking out, and they have no idea what's going on, and they're like curious. It's like what do we do? You have to. Try to get Syndrome, but then Mr. Incredible's like, no, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt Jack Jack if I do that. So, um, they decide that they were going to throw Elastigirl up into the air, and then we have Syndrome like almost falling and then like crashing, and then eventually Jack Jack falls down, and then Elastigirl catches him, and then she forms like a parachute, and then they start gently going down, and there's like this huge explosion, and
Yeah.
then when they finally landed, then
All the debris
safely, and
runs
then
down, and then it's
yeah,
after all the smoke and dust is cleared, it's realized that Violet has finally made the force field that she was supposed to make
yeah, exactly.
in there,
And then you have the little kid who saw Mr. Incredible in the beginning of the movie when he picked up the car,
Mhm.
and then he says like that was
Totally
totally wicked.
wicked. And that was a good way to finish off. And so,
Yeah,
and then, so then we get to see, Dash is finally getting to be able to do sports and everything, and then Violet starts to come out of her shell and asks Tony Reginger for a date, and interesting to see if Tony Reginger comes back in the second
yeah,
film.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that
and
would be kind of interesting. Yeah.
yeah, that'll be good. And but I mean, here's the thing about this though. It's like in the second film, like she's gonna be outgoing. She's gonna have like a very very bubbly personality. There's kind of a worry that kind of like Violet's gonna remind a lot of. I mean, keep this in mind. The Incredibles 1 and the Incredibles 2 are gonna be very are separated quite a lot by time. And there's the one character that's come across that's come out recently that I feel is somewhat going to be kind of similar to Violet in The Incredibles 2. And you know who that person is?
Oh.
Miraculous Ladybug.
Oh.
There's probably me that thing is like it's going to be like, wait a minute, that's Violet. She kind of reminds me of Miraculous Ladybug. So I hope they
Yeah,
do
yeah,
something.
you're
Yeah,
right.
I hope
Absolutely.
I hope they do something that kind of like makes her stand out from her. So I think that's going to be something they're going to have to do because I mean I don't know if they can really put Violet back in the box. If so to speak. They can't really
No,
put her
that
back in the
wouldn't
shell
be
really.
good because then there'll be a step backward with her
I
character.
know, and like I said, they can't really do that really. So I don't know. Maybe
No, they
she.
can't because then it would be like it'll be taking a side step towards Violet's character,
Yeah.
and that would pretty much diminish the whole point of the first movie.
Maybe she.
I'm sure that they'll figure something out. I mean, we do remember that this movie is mostly about Helen's part of Helen's perspective. So I'm sure that maybe we will get some focus on Violet and Dash, but I'm sure that maybe as time goes on, maybe we will, learn a little bit more about Violet and how her personality has changed over the course of maybe from the first to the second movie. And we also have to understand, like, similar to Hey Arnold the Jungle movie, and I know that there's a lot of people who have high expectations for this. If there is something really disappointing that you would have liked to see, just remember that this movie did take a long time to come out, and it's not going to be what you expected it to be. And if it isn't, then I mean, if it doesn't turn out the way that you wanted it to be, then that's okay.
Yeah, I just think that I'm hoping that The Incredibles 2 is gonna, in regards to Banjo, go back into Violet. So I don't know, maybe she goes through a goth phase. Maybe maybe
Yeah.
that's how they get around it. She goes through a goth phase. Okay. Oh, anyway, so they end the film with a classic Underminer line, which I believe, because I believe they were doing this whole thing where what's the name of the John Ratzenberger, he would always get like the last line in a Pixar film, and so this is
Hmm.
another one of those films where he gets the last line. So
Yeah, yeah. In
and then
this
we
case, he's the new villain. He's the moth, the mole man. And then we have the Incredibles putting on their masks and their suits, and then Mr. Incredible pulls out his shirt, and you see the the logo, and then it cuts into the credits where it's like very superhero esque, like with the booming music and the silhouettes of the characters. It's really well done. Absolutely.
Yeah, and other for movies started actually doing that style right after that, because if you notice, definitely Deadpool did that type of style where like they did like the whole montage with that, and I think trying to think of other various other superhero movies kind of like did that afterwards. Where they did like the
Hmm.
flashy credits and then moved into like the main credits after that. So, you know, uh,
Yes.
the only one thing I probably would have liked is that. Imagine they did that with The Incredibles too. Every after the end of every Marvel film, they kind of like do like a teaser for what the next movie's gonna be. Like
Yes.
imagine if they did that for The Incredibles too, and they
Oh man,
did the
if
teaser.
we were like to sit down and like watch the movie, wait like 2 or 3, 5 minutes, and then The Incredibles 3, and then maybe we'd have like this huge gathering of like the remaining supers, and maybe there'll be like this be this huge villain who comes out of the limelight, maybe like working on this huge plan for like decades, and then he's gonna finally become like the main super villain, and maybe like it takes all the supers who are remaining to like fight off against him and save the world. That would be so amazing.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. So that's the end of The Incredibles, and we have to. I mean, I really want to talk about the box office because I do believe that it did incredibly well, and it
And
goes back to when I said about the why on earth they did not make a sequel right after that, and so you had 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the critical response was brilliant in that regard. And despite the concerns that the film would do an underwhelming results, the film domestic gross was, get this, $70,476,623,
wow,
and it went in. That was on like over 7,000 screens and 3,000 theaters. So it was
that's
like
crazy.
that. And so basically, this movie was doing an average of $17,000 per screen, basically, per theater, and $9,000 per screen. It was a big success, to say the least.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the only way that was broken was when Toy Story 3 came out and did $110 million at the box office.
Right.
And so, it
But
was.
you could argue that Toy Story 3 was a sequel. And so I would think that maybe for the longest time when it came to like, financially, an original Pixar movie, I'm sure that that would have been like the most amount of money made in a long time until maybe like another movie came along.
Mhm. And on top of that as well, in the Academy Awards category, The Incredibles won an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, and I think was this at the time when what's his name, Jack Black, did his funny joke where he said that every time he wants to basically make some money, he basically does a Kung Fu Panda movie and then takes all the money that he makes and bets it all on Disney at the Academy Awards. And
Maybe that would be shocking. This would have probably been like either shortly around the same time or before or after he was doing Shark Tale.
Yeah. So it beat two DreamWorks films, and guess what these films were? It was Shrek 2 and, oh my god, Shark Tale was nominated for an Academy Award? Really?
Yeah, can you believe it? And you have to understand that. I mean, sure, Shark Tale wasn't. It was like it had mixed reviews, but it did make a lot of money.
Well,
And
that
this
was.
was like, oh, this is DreamWorks equivalent of Finding Nemo, except it's smart, snarky, and it has Will Smith in it.
Mm,
But yeah, now a lot of people can see that it's a terrible, terrible movie. And even
wow.
still to this day, I'm sure that people can debate on which is the worst DreamWorks movie, but a lot of people say that this is.
It's a very dated movie as well, because what it has, like Christina Aguilera and whatchamacallit, and
Yeah, Christina Aguilera. Let's see. There's Renee Zellweger. There's Jack Black. There's Will
well,
Smith.
I won't
Like, when
go.
was the last time those names were relevant?
Well, no,
I mean,
Jack Black.
I'm sure. I mean, I mean, I know that we could argue about like, they still do acting, but Will Smith was in Bright.
I don't know. Jack Black's still relevant. I like to think. It's like I still like to
Yeah,
think.
well, yeah, but he hasn't like became like a main star title in a movie in a while. Actually,
Yeah.
I think that he's in a. I think the most recent movie he's in, like, it's a more dramatic movie. To kind of like sharpen his his dramatic chops. But for a lot of people, I don't think that his prime as an actor has reached this like at the height since like the early to mid 2000s with like Shallow Hal and Tenacious D and
Yeah. I remember
and
he was in the Muppets. I do remember that. So, I reckon the
yeah,
Muppets
yeah,
is.
that's true. And then similar to Eddie Murphy, a new generation of people would know about Jack Black until the Kung Fu Panda movies.
Well, to be fair, I think if we had to compare Jack Black and Eddie Murphy, I think Jack Black has had a far more successful career. I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jack Black is far more
than Eddie
successful
Murphy.
than Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy has appeared in films where he's actually lost money. I don't think that's ever happened to Jack Black. Thinking about
No,
it,
I don't
so,
think so.
yeah.
Unless it was like an indie film or maybe a film that was like so bad that none of us even know about it. But yeah, for the most part, Jack Black hasn't bombed that badly yet.
Yeah, that could still
Anyways,
happen, but anyway, that's
yeah,
still.
it's true. It can still happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a shame that there was never a sequel to The Incredibles until much later on, because as we mentioned before, the following year we would have Cars, and Cars made a ton of money, and it had a lot of toys and action figures, which I'm actually questioning. Was there a lot of like toys and action figures as much for The Incredibles as compared to Cars? Because even you said so yourself when we were talking about Cars 3 that if you try to look for a picture of Cars 3 or any of the movies on Google, you can only see the toys.
Well, the majority, the majority of images that I was searching for Cars were toys. Like, that's definitely so.
Right, exactly.
You can only tell why Cars exists. But in regards to The Incredibles, I mean, there was like food deals, and then there was like they also had like I imagine all Pixar films kind of do this. They had like the whole broadband services that they did as well.
Sure.
And then they also had McDonald's toys, and but no, I don't think they had like any like. Massive. I think the only thing I could think of is that they had a comic book deal with Dark Horse. I remember. I think.
Nice.
Oh no, sorry, DC Comics.
And then of course, DC. Okay.
DC.
And then of course we had the video games.
Yeah, and then we had the video games as well, which we had Rise of the Underminer, which was released on all the GameCube, Xbox, and PlayStation 2 and Mac OS. Really? It was released on Mac? Okay, then Mac did have a game. Would you believe it was The Incredible Rise of the Underminer? Okay, then and then there was a Windows game called The Incredibles When Danger Calls. So not to be confused with
Okay, so we did have a few bit of merchandise, but nowhere near as much as Cars.
No, and also there was Connect games for Connect Rush, the Disney Pixar adventure, and also they're on Disney Infinity as well. So they have had a stay. I'll definitely say that. So people they will be, and also their social media accounts have always been active since the movie came out. So
exactly. So I think that for the most part, I think out of all the Pixar movies, The Incredibles has still stayed in relevancy. I think even more now than it was like a few years ago, because with the likes of superhero movies becoming extremely popular thanks to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the fact that even with 3 Fantastic Four movies and like 2 or 3 animated series and maybe some comic books, The Incredibles still stands as like one of the best, if not the best, superhero family ever made. And there were so many copycats of it, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, with like the X's and a whole bunch of other cartoons that try to follow up into the same foreground as like a family of superheroes, secret agents, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the Incredibles has still stayed relevant in pop culture, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel.
Mm-hmm. So do we even really need to score this? Because I think we're just going to give it 10 anyway. So
yeah, we are. So I mean, sure, there may be some little flaws here and there, but no, this is great. I mean, we also loved Ratatouille as well, but no, I think that this is Brad Bird's his best movie that he did for Pixar, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel, and they really have to step it up, especially since we've been waiting for a long time.
It is massively anticipated, I must say, and I got to be honest with you. I thought we were actually going to go through. I thought this was actually going to be the ending of PixMix. To be honest with you, I thought we were actually
Yeah,
going
me
to end with
too.
The Incredibles. So
Exactly.
it feels kind of weird
Thank
that.
you to the random wheel that we actually
Yeah.
got this, like almost toward the middle of PixMix.
Mm-hmm. And so, that's the end of another episode of PixMix. So anyway, we're going to look through the random wheel, and it looks like from the way our schedule's going at the moment, maybe the next episode is going to be released maybe around about maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But anyway, that's I guess you can say that's how random PixMix is. It just comes out whenever it wants. So yeah, Patricia, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And from myself, Aaron.
And Patricia.
Take care, and bye for now.
See you later.